Hello.
Jarvis, you are probably the #1 fan when it comes to these videos. I've seen you poking around in the comments section. And
I'm
so
everywhere.
You are. And so you know what? I thought it would be a treat to have you on to review some cards yourself. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. I thought about this beforehand, and I was like, should I play a few games in Master Duel? Should I go look at some cards myself? Should I do some thinking about Yu-Gi-Oh? And I thought, no, for the content, I will embarrass myself and look like a fool.
Excellent.
All in the name of engagement.
Well, we're all here to look like fools because, based off the way the series has gone so far, you don't have to really see more than one episode to know how these typically go. But
yes,
I thought I'd have a fun one for you. So before we get
excited.
into that, though, why don't you go and introduce yourself for anyone who isn't familiar with you, which would be a bit of a surprise. But also, you could tell us about your Yu-Gi-Oh background as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I would not be surprised if people don't know me, because this is kind of like a little cross-genre thing. But my name is Jarvis. I do like commentary on YouTube. I also have a podcast that's like commentary, like mental health discussion, and also a lot of gabbing about whatever our hyper focuses and interests of the day are.
Oh, you're in the right place for that.
Exactly. So my history with Yu-Gi-Oh my history with TCGs in general. When I was really young, I used to like take the bus over to my local Toys R Us and play in the Pokemon League. And the Pokemon League TCG. And then when I got a little bit older, I went next door to the local card store, and I would play in Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments. Obviously a big fan of the anime. And I played during, let's see, the latest set that I played during was probably Labyrinth of Nightmare.
Okay. Old school guy.
So pretty, old school. Not even like GOAT format is like a little bit too new school for me. So, I became familiar with your content, Cimo, because the progression series was a great way for me to fill in the blanks on like what I missed.
Sure.
In the years. And then in 2020, came back to Yu-Gi-Oh to play a little bit of Master Duel. I was like, is this going to be my new hyper focus? I had played a bunch of Hearthstone back in 2014, 2015, before I was doing content, and that started taking up all my time. Now I'm really into Magic. So the one thing I collect Yu-Gi-Oh! I watch a lot of these videos. I like to think about the good times I used to have back in the day, and maybe the not so good times I had watching my opponent combo off in Master Duel. But I don't have high expectations for myself here, and I'm here just to have a good time.
That's awesome. I think I got a very fun set of cards for you to look at. And actually,
Great.
I have two sets, because before we get into what I have challenged you today, what was between Yugi and Kaiba? Were you a Yugi guy or a Kaiba guy? That's going to dictate the course of this video.
Ooh. This is interesting. I think that I was more of a Kaiba guy.
Okay.
Because one, Blue Eyes. Two, like, just like even back then, I was like, Blue Eyes is just objectively better. Why would you even print that?
True.
like, because I played the first, me and my friend would play the starter decks against each other. Like, I remember kind of the card list of those starter decks. And it was just like, well, this doesn't seem fair. Your boss monster is just bigger, So definitely more of a Kaiba guy.
Okay.
Less of a heart of the cards, more of a use the best cards and try to defeat my enemies. That kind of guy. And I do side with Yugi famous or Yugi famously, or Yami Yugi famously said, no, actually it was Yugi. My grandfather's deck has no pathetic cards, Kaiba. And it does. He was wrong.
So with that, we are going to be showing you some iconic cards that Seto Kaiba played from the anime.
Ooh,
and
okay.
Your goal is twofold here. You're going to be very familiar with this formula. You're going to evaluate it and tell me if you think the card is good or not, first off. And then second of all, your main objective is to tell me whether or not you think at any point any of these Seto Kaiba cards serve time on the ban list, the TCG ban list specifically.
Okay,
I think this
TCG
is fun
ban
because Kaiba has both Yugi and Kaiba, because I made a list for both in case you were a Yugi guy. I think they actually have a lot of interesting cards that some people are familiar with, but you may actually be surprised to know whether or not these cards A, were actually playable in like a playable sense, right? But B, also, if they were too good that they'd actually get banned, but you didn't see that in the show. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with your first card here. We're going to kick it off real nice and simple.
Ooh, okay, let me click this open. All right. Blade Knight.
Love this guy.
So it's
sick art.
It's a 4-star light monster. It's a warrior. 1600 attack, 1000 defense. While you have 1 or less cards in your hand, this card gains 400 attack. If you control no other monsters, the effects of flip monsters destroyed by battle with this card are negated. Okay, so early Yu-Gi-Oh, you're fighting a lot more on the board. You've got flip monsters. You've got your wow, I'm forgetting all of the what's the insect that's like a 400 300 flip monster? Man-eater bug. Yeah. So the thing is, card advantage is important in all card games, and especially so in Yu-Gi-Oh. So you want to play everything out to the board here and have 1 or less cards in hand, all for 2000 attack. Okay, so you could be playing some aggro strats. Maybe this is like but the thing is, this is you're normal summoning this, I feel like, in this era. So I'm deciding if this was ever banned, or if I'm also saying if it was good or not.
Both. So you can start if you think it's good or not, and then obviously that might lead you to the conclusion as to whether or not you think it's banned.
Yeah, I think this is maybe fine.
Okay.
I definitely don't think something like this would be banned.
Okay.
Because I think that it doesn't even scale with the power of the game. I think, like, obviously in Modern Yu-Gi-Oh, this is like a very bad card. To my knowledge, I haven't played too much Modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but even back then, am I allowed to ask when this was printed?
You are. This was actually first given to us in one of the collectible tins, as a matter of fact.
Oh.
I think this was the second wave of tins, if my memory serves,
so
from like 2003.
There's like 2003, yeah. So there's 2002 tins and 2003 tins.
So this first was given to us as one of those tin promos. That was, remember the little window you could see which card came in the tin? This was one of those. Yep.
I had the first generation of those tins, and if memory serves, the first generation of those tins went up to Pharaoh's Servant, and I could be wrong, but it's something like that. I think in that world, because like Pharaoh's Servant is the introduction to Gemini Elf, so you've got 1900 4-stars, and this guy is a conditional 2000.
Okay.
So I think that, sure, in the best case scenario, it's hitting over Gemini Elf, and I'm sure there's also like a few conditional 2000s I know in later, like a year or so later. I'm gonna say, yeah, this card is fine to bad, and it was never banned.
Final answer.
Yeah, that's my final answer.
All right, so Blade Knight's a really cool card. This might be one of my top favorite artworks in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! I just love like how the sword is just like almost piercing through the card art. It's just so
it's like,
sick.
It reminds me of the action shot of like, not Buster Blader, but Barrel Dragon.
Oh, right. Buster Blader's not too bad either. I think like I get what you mean there. So Blade Knight is actually a phenomenal card. And
oh, really?
Yes. Now, obviously, you pointed it out. By modern Yu-Gi-Oh standards, this card's unplayable. But there's a couple things and some context to this. So first of all, its stats being 1600's like by default okay. Getting it to 2K in the instance where you have 1 or less cards in hand is fine, but it's not like what you're necessarily going for. It's more so the fact that if it's the only other monster you have, it's negating the flip effects, right? Not to mention,
wait, let me stop you there. So I'm like, okay, so this is negating jars. This is negating
Magician of Faith.
Magician of Faith.
Yep.
But I guess I was also thinking of, at 1600, it's hitting over every defense, everything in defense mode that's not like a 2000. Like, there's not that many like 1700s. There's like the walls that are like 1850 and like things like that. But most things are kind of weenies when it comes to defense, especially things with flip effects. So if someone's playing something face down, you can probably confidently attack into this.
Exactly. Also, considering it's a light warrior, its typing is really strong because being a warrior, you can search it with reinforcement of the army, so it was very tunable.
Rhoda.
Yep, Rhoda.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The 1000 defense meant that Witch of the Black Forest, very old Yu-Gi-Oh, you could search this that way if you needed to, and being a light for chaos synergy was also quite important as well.
Yeah. The chaos stuff was after my time in terms of old school Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yep.
And I should have clocked that because obviously there's all the banish a light and a dark.
Exactly. Now there's a bit of context though, because I would say back in the day people wouldn't mind playing Blade Knight, but it wasn't something that everyone decided to play. If you're playing like a warrior toolbox deck, which is like what I played back in the day, you would just have a Blade Knight because it's a good body. But later on, as people started to revisit GOAT format, it's funny you mentioned that earlier. GOAT format, the second best deck in that format is the Warrior deck. And the Warrior deck plays 3 copies of Blade Knight as its main attacker and plays a metric just shit ton of trap cards. So ideally, your best play is to play Blade Knight, set all your back row, so it's 2,000. And now all the best monsters in GOAT format are, not all of them, but most of them are flip effect monsters that the Chaos deck likes to play. So if you're going up against the Warrior deck and this is their opening play, you're going to be in for a world of hurt, because this is, in retrospect, not in retrospect, but as people just started to refine GOAT format, people started to understand how good of a card Blade Knight is.
Yeah.
And it's just a phenomenal card.
It's really interesting how the GOAT format now, like so many of us were 11 when these cards came out.
Yeah.
That it's really cool to see GOAT. I think of this with with like something like old school RuneScape, where no one knew the metas back when we were children.
Yeah.
And then now it's a bunch of 30-year-olds playing it, and they've hyper optimized every little interaction. So this is like, that's cool to see. I mean, so it sounds to me like it is somewhat meta dependent, because it's great against, like, okay, not necessarily meta dependent, but some of the value is meta. The other value is how many creatures are you playing in that Warrior deck? Because how consistently, I guess even if you had 2 creatures in hand and a bunch of traps and spell cards, you could just dump your hand down to 1. So as long as you have, and there's no mulligans in Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
Nope.
So as long as you don't have 3 creatures, but even still you have 1 more turn and then it bumps up to 2,000. So I can totally see the trap synergies make a lot of sense, because it's just like it's like your back row is like a second hand, except for now it's active. So you can like you don't sacrifice your card advantage.
Exactly. And mainly just like being able to take out stuff with flip effects, because the Chaos deck is considered like the best deck, and like the Warrior deck is almost the anti-meta strategy for the Chaos deck, if you will. And so being able to just make sure that none of those Magician of Fates resolve, not just the Night Assailants, like any flip effect, if it's turned off, then the Warrior player is going to be in a really strong position. So
Magician of Faith, just as a reminder to me, brings back a spell card, right?
Spell card, correct.
When you flip, yep.
Next card, let's give you a spell card. This one should look very familiar.
All right. Ooh, okay, enemy controller. This one is familiar. Activate one of these effects. Target one face-up monster your opponent controls. Change that target's battle position. Does Book of Moon do that as well?
Book of Moon puts it into face-down defense.
Face-down defense. Yeah. Okay, so
close enough. Though.
And then tribute one. It fiddles with the same knob, I guess. Tribute one monster, then target one face-up monster your opponent controls. Take control of that target until the end phase. Yeah, I mean in Yu-Gi-Oh, like there's a lot of like red cards in Magic that are like. Steal somebody's card, untap it for one turn. You can attack in, and it works in really aggro strategies. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, some of the powers are so big, and also some of the effects are so strong that like this card gives you flexibility. It's a quick play spell.
Yep.
You can goad someone's good thing into an undesirable position, so it effectively is like removal in that way as well. You can only activate one of the effects, but if you had 2 of these. You could you could steal their guy and tribute it. No, but it doesn't seem good. Okay. Yeah, this seems like a really good card. And was it banned? So I think the card's good. Was it banned? What's funny about these is that like these are cards that I've heard of, but like I never played in the era that they were good. And so
this would have been printed when you were playing. It's a little bit past because it's around like Chaos era, so it's a little bit after.
Yeah, it's a little bit after.
This is not a new card. This is a very
no.
I know
it's not a new card. I do know that. I know it's like so it's like just a slight bit after I was already playing Magic the Gathering, which I thought was like Yu-Gi-Oh's for children. I'm gonna go play with these 30-year-olds at my local card game store.
And now you get to play with the 40-year-olds at your local card
Exactly, yeah. And recently I did go to an event that I went to a card shop, and I didn't know that the card shop, when I was visiting New York recently, the card shop is popular with kids because they have some after-school programs.
Oh, that's fun.
So I played in a pre-release a two-headed giant pre-release, so it was like 2 versus 2 with me and my childhood best friend who we played all these games together, and we were exclusively playing against children. It was very adorable. Okay, the card's good. Was it ever banned? I'm trying to think of the interactions that. Okay, so chaos. So there's really strong guys, obviously, in that era that you can steal. I'll say it was banned. I mean, like, at the very least restricted, but yeah, I'll say it was banned at least once.
Final answer.
Sure.
Enemy Controller is a really cool card. I think why people love this card so much is just because of the flexibility, like you mentioned. Even at the very worst, being able to turn stuff sideways if you're being attacked, or you can even turn your opponent's stuff into attack position, so that way you can, like, ram into it, so you can actually, like, if it has a higher defense or you need to get the damage in. But then being able to, at will, you know, you can tribute something off to take something, maybe get rid of a low-statted guy to take their best thing. Just a really cool and awesome card. It's weird because, like, in old Yu-Gi-Oh!, this card didn't see a ton of play. But it's always been a card that people have gone back to and have found ways to incorporate into their decks. So as the game aged, people found more and more uses for this. This might shock you.
Eternal format.
Yeah, exactly. This might shock you. Enemy Controller has actually seen, like, modern play within the past year. That's how good it is.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
I do too.
Love that.
I do too. I think it's awesome to see these, like, old cards out of nowhere, especially when they're iconic ones from the anime like this that are actually just good enough to see play. And it was never banned, so you did get it wrong. But
fair.
I think, understandably, it's an incredibly powerful card. I don't think it is ever, like, doing anything too crazy. It is a bit conditional.
Yeah, it does feel like somewhat fair. You know, like like I only have the my litmus test of, like, bans around when I was playing was like Raigeki.
I mean, that's a good litmus test, to be fair.
Yeah. I'm like, and okay, it's like Raigeki, that card's really good. Dark Hole, that card's really good. But this, like, feels a little bit more fair than something like that.
Sure. But you're right on the money, though, in terms of, like, your evaluation of it. You were just incorrect in terms of whether or not it served any time on the ban list. I'm not surprised. Like,
I'm just loving looking at the cards.
It's just, I think, especially by older Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards, it's a card that there was just things that, like, you mentioned Book of Moon. I think Book of Moon did what Enemy Controller did, but better, especially because it put the monster face down.
Right.
I think that's really just the unfortunate part of this card is that it never really had, like, its, like, major time to shine until people really found, like, the cool uses for it compared to old Yu-Gi-Oh! But that's okay. That's how games work.
One quick question about quick play spells, because so I know that you can set them face down and activate them, but you can play them out of your hand, can't you?
Yep.
Or you can't? Okay.
You can. 100%.
What's the condition on that?
It's basically at any point where you'd be able to activate a quick effect is when you could do that. But you can't do it on the opponent's turn from the hand. You'd have to have it set face down to do it during the opponent's turn.
Gotcha. You have to. That's what it is. That's the restriction. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but Enemy Controller allowed people to do a lot of fun stuff by like just dodging certain effects or being able to take your opponent's things. Like being able to have that quick play flexibility. If this card was not a quick play, it would be unplayable. It'd be unplayable.
In the quick play is because there's like spell speed in Yu-Gi-Oh, and so you can like use this as a response to stuff, right?
Exactly.
Cool,
and it was very good for that reason. All right, nice. I showed you a monster. I showed you a spell. Let's show you a trap.
Oh, Ring of Destruction. Yeah, this is a Kaiba card. Target one trap card, of course. Target one face-up monster on the field. Destroy that target. If you do, inflict damage to both players equal to that target's attack. Okay, so my immediate thought is like, you can do some like really. This says target one face-up monster on the field, not including. It doesn't say opponents or anything like that. So theoretically, you could like attack in with something huge and then flip this and then like essentially double your damage output. So it seems very bursty in terms of like an aggro type strat. It does inflict damage to both players, but if you're like in that world, if you're on the aggro, then like you're in a race and you think you can deal damage faster to your opponent. And then on the flip side, you can use it defensively to bolster a strategy where you want to get your opponent down. Obviously, you can use your life as a resource here, so it just seems valuable in general. So like the utility of the card, it seems strong on attack, on defense, when you're behind, when you're ahead. So a good card, check. Whether or not it was banned, I feel like could be situational, could be depending on what was in the format. So when I was playing, if I was, and I wasn't even playing in like, I would go to my local, and most of the people would be like, I lived in college town growing up, so most of the people would be like university students, and I was 11. and and so I was like not fully like locked into like the perfect meta strats. I did play a lot of Beatdown, and I played a lot of United We Stand and Mage Power and stuff like that. And so I'm like, if I had some like Hayabusa Knights or something and some like with some equipments on them, and then I'm just like attacking in, or I'm double attacking, and then I'm like popping my own guy and then whacking somebody, or I'm, you know, on the attack, it's my turn. I've set my trap card for one turn previously. I can activate it on my own turn, right? So if I'm facing a big guy that's face up, that they're like, I'm gonna defend you, I can flip it up, destroy their guy, burn us both, and then attack in with my big guy. So I'm going to say that it was banned, and the reason is I don't know this, but I can imagine a degenerate like OTK type strategy. I know there was like Cyberstein. I don't know if that existed in this era, but if you like Cybersteined in Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, that's 4,000 attack, or 40. Is it 4,000 or 4,500?
45.
Okay, yeah, so that's 4,500. So you attack in with that guy and then pop it with your own Ring of Destruction. You've got like an OTK. So I'm gonna go ahead and say it's banned.
Final answer.
It's
interesting you thought Ring would be the banned piece of that that equation there, because you're correct.
Well, yes.
So that isn't the reason Ring is banned.
Yeah,
but that
I
is
just realized the combo I just described. Cyberstein, you have to sack half your life, so you'd probably kill yourself doing that.
Yeah.
But anyway, you get the I'm trying to put the pieces together.
No, the play pattern's still there, though. One of the most degenerate, in quotes, things people would do with Ring of Destruction is that if you have a moderately statted card, like you can even take Blade Knight, right? Like if you attack and your opponent has all of a sudden less than 1,600 attack, you could Ring of Destruction the Blade Knight, you win the game immediately. So like you said, with doubling the damage output, that's where Ring of Destruction was really potent. But being able to pop your opponent's monster as well, just for a good one-for-one removal. Keep in mind, this card wasn't released too long after, because you said Labyrinth of Nightmare. This card was Pharaonic Guardian, so it was only a couple sets later.
Yeah, and I remember seeing the packs, but Pharaonic Guardian is like the one set I like remember not playing that set at all.
Yeah, and so Ring of Destruction, there wasn't like a ton of one-for-one removal in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yet sure, there was the Regekis, the Dark Holes, you know, stuff like that. But Ring of Destruction being this very flexible removal card, because Sakuretsu Armor is a card that a lot of people know that on attack, it destroys a monster. You have to wait for them to attack. Right?
And Torrential Tribute, what did that do again? I remember that was played.
On Summon, it destroys everything on the field.
Yeah.
Where Ring of Destruction doesn't care, right? You just, at any point, if you want to nuke something with Ring, you can. The reason this card actually ended up getting banned, aside from the fact you could argue being like this flexible one-for-one removal is really good for old Yu-Gi-Oh! The main reason, though, is actually funnier. It's actually because it forced draws in a tournament level. Because if you ring a monster and both of your life points are less than that monster's attack, then you're going to force a draw. And from like a tournament perspective, draws just really suck.
Because I mean, like, it messes up with all of your like Swiss seedings. And I can totally imagine that. That's so funny though, because it's such a large symmetrical burn of both players that of course it's going to force a lot of draws, because all you have to do is get down within like some reasonably threatened life point. You can be and you could also be losing the game on the board. You can be losing the game in card advantage or whatever, and then it's your
way out, essentially.
It's your way out. It's your ticket out to a draw, and you take that. You for sure take that. Yeah.
So they banned it. They eventually brought it back. They errated it. They put a way more text on it, and essentially, you can only target your opponent's monster. The monster has to have like less or equal attack than their life points. And then like they changed the way the burn works, so it still symmetrically burns, but it burns you before it burns the opponent. So
that is a different card.
Basically, they may as well have just made a different card at that point. That's how I feel. But
yeah, they do retrains and like detrains and shit all the time. Why wouldn't they just like? Why?
I don't
what?
know, man.
That's such a dramatically different card.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, but it also feels like it's so specifically like a band-aid over the problem.
Yeah.
When you're like, oh, you can't do specifically the thing you guys were doing before, but we now we codified it into the errata.
Exactly. It's wild. It's wild. But you're on the board. You got a point.
Cool. We got one.
All right. Next up, let's go back to monsters for you.
I've seen this guy before, but I couldn't tell you what he does, which is fun. I think that's good for this because I don't want to know. Okay. Twin-headed behemoth, 3-star. During your end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was destroyed on the field and sent there this turn, it's interesting wording, you can special summon this card, but its attack and defense become 1,000. You can only use the effect of Twin-headed behemoth once per duel. That's interesting. And that... How is that enforced? Because you could have multiple copies of Twin-headed behemoth. So does that mean once per instance of the card? And then what changes the instance would be a question. But then, or is it once per physical copy of the card?
It's once per any copies. Ever. Yes, ever.
So
if you were to play
I run 3, yeah, then I can only use this once. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so how is this abusable? During the end phase, obviously if you couldn't do this once per duel, it would be busted and like loopable somehow. During the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was destroyed on the field and sent there this turn, that's an easy thing to do, by the way. So probably not in combat, probably as a result of your own some combo or something. You can special summon it, and then it essentially like provides like double material.
Yep.
For something. And so like I don't know what you would feed this into, what sort of engine you would feed this into, but I can use this for my normal summon, and then it provides 2 materials, but not at the same time. Actually, I don't know how timing works for this, because like for example, if I this is a very dumb example, but it'll help for my own understanding. So
sure.
Let's say I want to summon Blue Eyes White Dragon.
Okay.
And this is during the end phase. Yeah, the timing won't work for that. Okay.
Yeah.
So
plus it'd have to be destroyed, so it doesn't work for tribute summoning.
Okay, right, because that doesn't count. That's a sacrifice or a tribute.
That's just a sacrifice. Yeah, same thing. Now, notably, for a bit of context, this card was released in Legacy of Darkness, which was the set after Labyrinth of Nightmare, which is why it probably looks familiar.
That's why I know it. Yeah. But I have no clue how this was used. What could this have been fed into? Catapult turtle. I'm gonna go ahead and say this card is good but not banned. I don't know the specific context.
Sure.
But I would say that like feels like it wouldn't be this card's fault for any bannings.
Okay.
Like this just seems like value. Unless is this relevant in combat? I attack in. I Ring of Destruction. It comes back. I attack and I deal 1,500. I Ring of Destruction. I deal another 1,500. It comes back. I activate another Ring of Destruction. No, I'm trying to think of like how I could use this. But yeah, I'll say good but not banned.
Final answer.
Yeah, final answer.
I'm not even going to beat around the bush. You were right on the money with this one. Good, but not banned. So, Twin-headed behemoth is just like you said. It's just good value. Funny enough, this is, I believe, the first once per duel effect in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which people kind of question why this is a once per duel effect, but that's neither here nor there. It's not like it was particularly broken, but
I was like, once per turn feels like it would have sufficed.
Yeah, I mean, it is older Yu-Gi-Oh! To be fair. There wasn't really anything else that had this sort of like unique resurrection style of effect. And by older Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards, resurrection effects were more rare because there was only a couple cards that really did this sort of thing. Reborn, Premature Burial, Call the Haunted, like that's kind of it.
Makes sense that you would be conservative because like putting this once per duel out here allows you to examine the play pattern in the wild.
Yeah.
And if it were uncapped, you could have unleashed, open Pandora's box in terms of some degenerate combo that you don't know about.
So Twin-headed behemoth has a lot of interesting, unique utility. First of all, its stats are really good that make it searchable and tutorable.
Oh, it's 3 stars. Yeah,
it is 3 stars, which can hit particularly under gravity bind or level limit, funny enough, which are just very annoying floodgates for the time.
So just quick things you've unlocked in memory. This is the only place I'll ever be able to say this. There was this guy who I would play against all the time who played gravity bind control with like Dream Clown.
Yep.
And some other thing.
Crass Clown.
Very annoying.
Probably.
Yeah, Crass Clown. Yeah, and oh my God, what a pain in the neck that was. Okay, yeah, rant over.
Yeah, you're good. So twin-headed behemoth. Also, typically how this card would work is that it's like an okay statted monster to do combat with things or just get in a bit of chip damage. And then if your opponent kills it off, cool, it comes back. There wasn't really many things that didn't destroy in old Yu-Gi-Oh! And then it comes back as a 1000. That's like pretty mediocre in terms of stats, but at that point you just tribute it off for like a better monster. And that was like, by old Yu-Gi-Oh standards, that's pretty damn good. This card actually did get limited. It wasn't banned, but limited to only one copy, so that's sort of like the whole once per duel thing too.
That makes sense. So yeah, because in Yu-Gi-Oh you're attacking, you choose attackers.
Correct.
Or you choose the targets for attacks. So you can just knowingly, and there's no summoning sickness.
Correct.
So,
you just get in.
So it comes out of your hand, you attack in, so it's essentially a removal spell, then it immediately comes back. That's just good value.
Yeah, and if your opponent doesn't have a monster that can contest it, if they have to waste removal on twin-headed behemoth, it just feels bad, right? Because then it's like, oh, I wasted this Ring of Destruction, let's say, and now it's just going to come back. So in terms of card economy, you went down a card for nothing, really. So
this is like those cards in Magic or Hearthstone that like create a little guy when they die.
Pretty much. That's exactly what this is. Yeah. And so like it wasn't particularly game breaking or anything. No one would really say this was like the best card in old Yu-Gi-Oh, but like it was just an okay card. Like it was good.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good pawn.
I think people would laugh that this was limited at some point, but you know.
Yeah, that is really interesting, especially because it's once per duel. So it's like all you're limiting is the consistency of this small value gain.
Yeah, but again, like when revival effects are pretty rare, like I could kind of understand that maybe they want to, you know, maybe just put a damper on that just to an extent.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Next card.
Whoa. Okay, this one I can't say that I recognize. Okay, Shrink. Target one face-up monster on the field. The original attack of that monster is halved until the end phase. This just seems bad. This allows you to win a combat. In terms, it just goes 1-for-1, but conditional 1-for-1. So I'm like, what could you like? I think that on its face, like a vanilla usage of this card, I struggle to see I feel like having to work to get just a 1-for-1 value here doesn't feel good. And then it also saves you on the defense a little bit. So like, you know, they attack, you have the set, you flip it up. It's a combat trick essentially in like Magic terms. How could this possibly be broken? Turn one face-up monster, target one face-up monster on the field. Original attack. And it just says original attack, so if it's modified by anything, then not that that's like super relevant, but it just adds to the conditional nature of this card.
Oh, funny aside, I also think they modified Ring of Destruction that it also says original attack, because the original text is its current. So if you buffed like some big thing up, then you could ring it for its full stats.
That's what I want. That's what I want to do. They're like, you don't get to have fun.
No fun allowed with Ring of Destruction.
I'll say this card. I actually will take a strong stance and say this card is just bad and never banned, because I'm so curious how it could be broken, and I would love to learn.
All right, final answer.
Yeah, that's my final answer.
So Shrink is really cool. So this was a card that they showed in the anime because, well, not because of any reason. It's just because they showed it. But it didn't get printed until a lot later. And the reason it didn't get printed until later is because, this might blow your mind, this was actually a prize card from the... They didn't have YCSs back then. They were called SJCs from the big tournaments. And the prize card for one of the series, or one of the years rather of the series, was Shrink. So Shrink was actually a prize card.
Yeah, SJC Shonen Jump Championship.
That's correct.
Here, 1 second. I'll show you something. Here's my childhood copy of the first issue of American Shonen Jump. You can see my childhood address here. It's fine. But anyway, this is the first one. Bought that at like a Food Lion in the magazine aisle. And then this one's relevant because it was the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon came as a promo in this. You can see here where I pulled it out.
That's so awesome. The memories. And so, the memories.
As an adult, I did go on eBay and buy a sealed copy that still has the blue eyes in it, just to have.
Just to have it. I mean, that's cool.
Just to capture my childhood joy. But yeah, okay, cool. Shout out to Shonen Jump.
Yeah, so it was a prize card for, I believe, the 2006 SJC series, because they rotated the prize card out every year. And eventually they printed it in another set, so it was more widely available. And similar to what your initial impressions are, a lot of people are like, like, you know, this is like whatever. And it turns out that Shrink actually ended up being a particularly good card, especially once it was more widely available for people to play around with it. The reason being, I wouldn't say it was like so highly in demand as a prize card that people were shelling out hand over fist for it.
Right.
But when it was more widely available,
it wasn't Mechanical Chaser.
No, it was not Mechanical Chaser. No.
Wasn't that the first SJC or something? The first prize card?
No, that was from a tournament pack. That was
tournament pack.
So that was
That's
super
right,
rare.
right.
That was super
was
rare.
Was it TP1 then?
TP1. Yep. It was the first
yeah.
Ultra in TP1.
Yeah.
And the stats mattered, to be fair.
1850. Yeah.
1850. Yep. No Gemini Elf yet.
Yeah.
And,
sorry, Lajin.
And so Shrink, people started finding a lot of really cool application for this card. So for one thing, I don't know if you remember like the trap hole cards, for instance, like trap hole, bottomless trap hole.
Yeah, bottomless trap hole.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Shrink
you can dodge it.
You can, yeah. So people figured out like, okay, I go summon big guy, I go activate bottomless. If you shrink it, the guy survives. And yeah, you had to waste a card to do that. But depending on if that guy really needed to stick, that could have been really important, right? Being a combat trick was also really applicable as well, just because of being able to use it like in the damage step meant that your opponent couldn't really like respond with other types of removal because the damage step is its own classification where you can only use certain types of effects. So it became this like very unique form of removal, and some decks in particular, like Gadget decks, Gladiator Beast decks, these are decks you'd see later on, really loved Shrink.
Decks where you need specifically... You need some cards to stay alive because you're like putting together pieces for something.
Yeah, it's more so that Gladiator Beast specifically was a very combat-focused deck, and so Shrink meant that it was you were always going to win combat, and then they would have this effect that during the end of the battle phase, they would shuffle into your deck and special any other Gladiator Beast onto the field. So they were one of the first archetypes that could like tutor for one another, which is really cool.
So it's an enabler to kind of get through with your very powerful combo, and there's not a lot of your very powerful value engine, and there's not very many other enablers to like push that through.
Yeah, pretty much. It just made it so that if you were playing something that was a really high value advantage engine, but not necessarily strong in the combat department, it allowed you to kind of go toe to toe with the higher attack statted decks, if you will.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and so it wasn't like ever like the most broken thing ever. It wasn't banned, so you were right on the money with this one.
Yeah.
But it's just like a neat card that some people looked at and were like, yeah, like this works in this specific strategy. And so it did see plenty of play.
I don't know enough about how Yu-Gi-Oh's damage step works, but like combat tricks are very common in Magic, and there's a mechanic in the new Duskborn set that just came out that if it's called survival, and if a creature is tapped on the second main phase, which means it either survived combat or you had some other way of tapping it, then you get some effect, and some of those effects can be return a card with mana value 3 or less to your hand, or like pretty strong things. Yeah. Okay. And so it like people are theorizing now about how like what is the power, like obviously you would rather use a card that just taps your guy so it doesn't have to even risk combat, but combat tricks that keep something alive through combat so that effect can go off are maybe higher value in those specific synergies. So it kind of feels very similar to this, but I guess it's a less common thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! But I know now modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't nearly as combat focused, so probably wouldn't see very much play these days.
No, by modern standards, this card would never see play. There's a similar card that kind of does something similar to this, but it also gives the monster like spell and trap immunity, so it's way better. And that has seen modern play. So
that's cool.
That card's like 10 years older than Shrink, so I would hope so.
Right.
Anyway, next card. Let's go back to a trap card for you.
Interdimensional matter transporter. By the way, when I squint my eyes, this looks like a tentacle.
It kind of does. I see that. I see that. It's got like the 3 gems.
Yeah. All of the colors, all of the kind of placement of the colors makes sense. Okay.
Gareth, put a tentacruel on screen so people can see that.
Target one face-up monster you control. Banish that target until the end phase. So good value, because what do you want to do? You want to target your opponent's stuff for combat. You want to target it for removal, or what have you. Maybe they're trying to steal it with a enemy controller, because I think this card was maybe legal around the same time. Because
they were legal around the same time. All these cards I'm showing you, I will let you know if there's an exception. All these cards were legal like within a year or two of each other.
Okay, cool. So like, and you're like, psych, I actually dodged that. So not exactly similar to Shrink, but in that situation it would be. But then this seems like it has additional value. Do how would this? I'm sure there's like even more stuff you can do with this. So, Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have like it doesn't have many enter the battlefield type effects, does it?
I would say nowadays it has way more than it
nowadays
did before.
It does.
But
okay,
to clarify, this would not trigger an on-summon effect. Yeah, because the monster would just be returned to the field. So it doesn't resummon it.
It's different, yeah, because it really differs for the games. But like in Magic, there's cast and there's enters.
Yeah.
So like there's a couple of different things there. Okay, I'm like trying to think of what you could do with this other than dodging stuff, and that seems good enough. Like, so I would say that the card is good enough and sees play. Like if Shrink sees play, I feel like this sees play. It's probably got even more utility. But does it enable something like Degenerate?
Ooh, he's in the tank on this one.
I'm so curious, but I want to know. It's so what's the word? It is so I so much want to just tell me the answer. I want to know the lore. But I'll say this is a good card that saw like moderate play, maybe moderate plus, like not in every deck, but like it's definitely like one of those staple like cards maybe.
Okay.
And but it was never banned.
Interdimensional Matter Transporter sucks. This card is awful. Yeah. Now, there's some context. I'm sure there are some people that have had success with this card in a very limited capacity, but this card basically saw no competitive play. The reasoning is that when you look at the power of trap cards during this time, we've talked about Mirror Force, we've talked about Torrential Tribute, we've talked about Ring of Destruction, and the biggest issue with this card is that in card economy, it's a -1, right? You use it, your guide zaps out, but then like the card goes away and he comes back later. Sure, that could be useful if you're protecting your guy from being killed by an opponent's monster or card effect. So then like you might trade it with one of their cards potentially. Let's say they use like Ring of Destruction on your guy, you tag it out with Matter Transporter.
Yep.
Okay, then you at least broke even kind of in that regard.
Yeah.
But especially by older Yu-Gi-Oh standards, there's so many cards that are just like better. You would rather just have a card that's going to kill your opponent's thing, or it just doesn't really have the flexibility.
More proactive.
Yeah,
this is like very much like you're sitting back and you're waiting for your opponent to do exactly the thing that you need them to do.
Right. It's super reactive, which I think is the problem with it. You compared it to Shrink. Shrink can be good offensively and defensively, which is I think adds just way more value. Also, being a quick play spell I think helps versus a trap, because that means it can be even more proactive if you want it to be. So the fact you have to like waste a turn setting this, and then if you never really get any value out of a card like this, it kind of just feels bad. And so, like, yes, there are applications for it, but for the most part, this card has basically just never done anything.
That makes sense. Unfortunate, but what was I gonna say? Well, it's a shame. You tried, Tentacruel.
You tried.
You tried.
All right, only a few more left. Tell me what you think about this guy.
Ooh, Kaiser Glider. Okay, there's a lot of Kaisers in early Yu-Gi-Oh.
There are.
I still couldn't tell you what that is. So it's a 6-star. That is that's still in the one.
Yes, still one
summon. One tribute. 2400. Okay, so we're looking at less than Summon Skull in terms of the one tribute attacks.
But it ties with Jinzo.
Ties with Genzo, but 2200 defense, which is like pretty high. But like I feel like with the large, like unless it's like a bigger boss monster, having the attack and defense be high like doesn't seem that valuable, because you usually want it in either one mode or the other. I still haven't read the effect. Okay, so Dragon cannot be destroyed by battle. Okay, with a monster that has the same attack, it does hit over Genzo and it wins. If this card is destroyed instead of the graveyard, target one monster on the field, return that target to the hand. Interesting. So this is another card that feels like it could give some tempo, where you attack in, and also if you die, you bounce something. One monster on the field. There's not much inconvenience in. So you said these cards were all legal within like roughly 1 year from each other?
1 to 2 years of each other.
1 to 2 years, yeah. So like in early Yu-Gi-Oh, there are summon effects, but maybe they're not as prevalent. And the summon conditions, I feel like, haven't gotten crazy, where it's like you need 5 million materials, and you need this guy and that guy, and I'm stacking my Xyz dudes and creating my Voltron that has 1 million like Omni Negates or whatever. And then also, how do you get this guy on the field without a sack? So I feel like, I don't know, like there must be some way to must be some way to get him out for cheap, or maybe some way where you don't have to tribute to get him down. But I feel like the fact that you have to tribute to get him down, and you're comparing that to like Jinzo, which is like, sure, it's a tribute, but it's like this card rules. And Jinzo's probably not legal at this point, though.
Jinzo's still legal at this point. I'll give you that.
It is still legal? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. But I'm like, if I want to go after someone else's Jinzo and get a little more tempo, wouldn't I just run Jinzo? Because then I have a Jinzo in my deck. But I'm gonna say I can't imagine an effect like this was banned.
Okay.
It feels like it has like an expensive summon condition unless there's some way to cheat it out. Essentially, its effect says this card actually has 2401 attack, which is like how relevant is that really? Because like would I pay this for a card that said 2401, and then you just get to bounce? Yeah, I say this card. I could be wrong. I mean, I don't know. I don't play this game, but it's I'll say it's bad and never banned.
Final answer.
Yeah.
You are correct. This card is bad and was never banned. It's like you said, like why out of all of... So first of all, especially by older Yu-Gi-Oh standards, your tribute monsters have to be insane for you to want to justify playing them.
Right.
And Jinzo is, at this point, essentially the cream of the crop. There really is like no better tribute summon at this point than Jinzo. And so while Kaiser Glider on the surface, like it seems like a fine card, right? I think the destroy by battle effect is kind of irrelevant unless you're specifically battling Jinzo, which is kind of funny. I think the second line is probably more relevant here, where if it gets killed, you can bounce something. Tempo... I would say tempo in Yu-Gi-Oh! Probably exists less so compared to any other card game, just because Yu-Gi-Oh! You could just, even in old Yu-Gi-Oh! You can kind of play so much at once that, like, it's really...
absolutely.
There isn't, like, a resource system kind of, like, managing how tempo's distributed.
Yeah.
Right.
Because normally in tempo with, like, Magic or something... There's only so many, or even Pokemon, there's only so many actions you can take, or types of actions because of the resources. Or, you know, Pokemon, you can do a lot of stuff, but you can only play one supporter card per turn or whatever. So, even if you had the out for something, you gain advantage by the fact that they can't out all of your stuff at once. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's just like, I would like to out all your stuff at once, please, because I have 3 spells in my hand that do that. Yeah,
exactly. Now, I will say by older Yu-Gi-Oh standards, when, you know, the normal summon was kind of hard locking how much you could do in a turn, you know, there was a more like justifiable, you know, concept of tempo where it's like, okay, in the instance of Kaiser Glider, right? If I blow up Kaiser Glider and then Kaiser Glider bounces my guy, maybe that does end my turn because now I can't do anything else, right? So, especially if you bounce like maybe a tribute summon, because like hypothetically you could bounce their Jinzo back to the hand and now, okay, they have to commit the resources to resummon it. So, there's like,
but then it's also like Jinzo in that situation, it's like, how did we get in the situation where, like, what, it seems like a misplay. It seems like, why would they destroy Kaiser Glider knowing full well that Jinzo's coming back to their hand? I feel like just don't do that.
Exactly. So, like, Kaiser Glider kind of gives you a bit of a consolation for it dying because, again, older Yu-Gi-Oh! There isn't many ways to out things that aren't by destruction, because battle is also counted by destruction as long as it goes to the graveyard. So, like, you know, maybe in like a sort of sealed draft limited environment, this card would be okay. Especially because then there's a lot more, you know, like tempo and stuff going on there. But even then, this card has been, there may be only like one deck ever that has like ever played this card. And that was like, that wasn't even good. So
do people play limited Yu-Gi-Oh? Is that like a format these days?
Like, I would generally say no, unless it's just like a group of friends that, or, you know, it's like progression series, right? You know, if people come up with their own form of limited Yu-Gi-Oh, that's really the only way people play that, which is,
it's a shame because I limited is one of my favorite formats in Magic, like draft and sealed, and it does give a new life and appreciation to cards that would otherwise, because like you look at a card and you go, there's no way this sees standard play, or there's no way this sees, you know, play in the eternal, you know, what is the main format called in Yu-Gi-Oh?
Advanced format, but we only have one format, so you know you could just say anything.
Is it still called advanced from like back in the day where there were like two different sets of rules?
Pretty
much.
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though traditional basically doesn't exist at this point, but
yeah, yeah,
whatever.
Okay, that's so funny. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. But yeah, I do love that aspect of some other card games. But you know, Magic is the only one with a ton of different formats because Pokemon really like those things are still getting off the ground.
Yeah.
But I would love to see. I love to see things like progression series and different takes and constraints to like add more flavor to the cards because I'm sure all of us have tons of meaningless bulk that we're just sitting on that we'll never see value because it's not like a tier 1, tier 0 type card.
Yeah, it's really gone to the YouTubers to come up with like their own versions of limited formats, and people really like it because it puts this constraint on deck building and progressing through whatever series with the rules that they create.
Right.
That's been a lot of fun for people. The only other like format Yu-Gi-Oh has at this point is some of the retro formats.
Yeah, the retro formats.
Yeah, but like Edison and such. But like
Edison and
yeah,
Go. Yeah.
So you've got those formats,
cool.
but there was a small period in like the early 2010s where they experimented with draft, and draft was actually part of the YCS, where for Top Cut you had to draft. Yeah, they actually made specific
like
packs. Yeah, they made specific packs. But Yu-Gi-Oh just like isn't really made for draft at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so they kind of did away with it after a year or two, which I honestly that's kind of just the way Yu-Gi-Oh is. I've kind of accepted it, but
it makes
sucks.
sense. It's I mean, look, I've seen enough of these videos. I'm not gonna shit on anybody's game, but that's so all of it makes sense. It's just very interesting how Yu-Gi-Oh has evolved over time.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Knowing that it was kind of like a Dungeons and Monsters Magic the Gathering parody before like they hard pivoted into the card game as like the main thing. Like it was just like that. It's so fascinating to see that evolution into like the games are so fundamentally like Yu-Gi-Oh is so unrecognizable from any of the other card games. But I would say that like, Hearthstone and Magic are pretty similar, but like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic have very, very different things going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's special.
I do too. And honestly, I think the things that people poke fun at are Yu-Gi-Oh for being its weaknesses are also its strengths for why people like the game so much.
Right.
But you can make that argument for any of the big three, especially.
Sure. So. Yeah, it's like, sure, the modern games end in a couple turns, but those turns are like 10 turns in another, in the other
exactly.
Because of all the interaction that happens.
Precisely. And so even though like in terms of turn length, games might only be a few turns, there's so much happening within an individual turn. And that's, the one thing that people love about Yu-Gi-Oh is that as long as the cards don't say otherwise, you can do basically as much as you want on your turn and sometimes even your opponent's turn. And no other game can do that. I always like to say Yu-Gi-Oh is the game that does what other games don't. All right, next card. I will preface this. This one is a newer card. So this was not printed during the same time, but it is still a Kaiba card nonetheless. This might be recognizable from the anime.
Oh, yeah. This is one, I feel like in college, I like rewatched the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, but I watched it subbed, and I don't think I was like always looking at the screen. And I feel like this is a card where I like looked away and was like, oh, right, I don't know Japanese. And then I like looked back and didn't know what was going on. Okay. Card of Demise. This is a spell card. Why is the text black here? Is this just a scan? It's a regular rare and like the scan like kind of did that?
I have no idea. Probably.
Okay, interesting. Draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. Also, for the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, your opponent takes no damage. Destroy during the end phase of this turn, send your entire hand to the graveyard. You can activate 1 card of Demise per turn. You cannot special summon. Oh my gosh, there's so many restrictions here. You're not attacking. You're not special summoning when you play this card. And you can only play 1 per turn. And what you get in return is drawing 3 at max if you have nothing in your hand. And then during the end phase. And then you also discard those cards. But it's Yu-Gi-Oh! So drawing 3 cards is pretty strong.
More than Pot of Greed, just saying.
Yeah, it's more than Pot of Greed. Yeah, this is like one of those where everybody was like, it's more than Pot of Greed. This is going to be busted.
The anime version of this is even more busted because in the anime it just says draw 5 cards and that's it.
Have you ever... Why? That's so funny. Have you ever read the Wikipedia page of like the anime effect of something like Obelisk the Tormentor?
Yeah,
where
it's
like,
wild.
Where it's like Wing Dragon of Ra has whatever the plot needed for 5 paragraphs.
Oh, sorry. sorry, Card of Demise does have a downside in the anime. After 5 turns, you discard your hand. Sorry.
Oh,
sorry. There is a downside.
Only 5 turns.
Only 5 turns, yes. The episodes are long over by then, but you know.
That's so funny. That could say you lose the game and it would still never come up.
Probably.
Okay. So you're drawing 3 cards, but you basically can't play the game because what are you going to do with those 3 cards? The strongest thing to do with those 3 cards in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, as I understand it, and I only played a little bit during the pandemic, is that you want to do a bunch of special summoning, because those strings of like special summoning and like pulling out of your extra deck for like the toolbox like thing that you need in this moment, all of that stuff is special summoning. And it says you cannot special summon during the turn. So it means that even it's not after this card resolves, like the first part of this effect, it's even before this, you can't activate this card if you have already special summoned. Is that right?
Correct. For the entire turn, it says you cannot special summon during the turn you activate this card.
What are the things that, if in old Yu-Gi-Oh, right? This is, well, in old Yu-Gi-Oh, is this even good? Because, like, the best things that you can do, you're restricting so much of the game. So setting traps, sure. Setting quick play spells so that you don't discard them. No form of special summoning, so that turns off everything from like for everything basically, except for tribute summoning. And you're probably not doing that in modern Yu-Gi-Oh very much. Normal vanilla tribute summoning. Is this card bad? Or is there something that you can do with those 3 cards? Okay, so
it says draw 3, Jarvis. It has to be good.
Okay, it says draw 3. It says draw 3, and I live here in Disneyland where I play Head of Exodia, Left Arm of Exodia, Card of Demise, and then I draw the other 3 Heart of the Cards.
Well, you'd only be able to draw 1 card. Remember, it's up until you have 3 in hand.
Right. So no. You don't understand. I played the Head of Exodia and it stuck.
Oh,
then,
sorry.
Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So
man, you are a fan of the show. You're talking about Disneyland and everything.
Right.
This is great.
Right. This is I trust my cards. They all speak to me. They have little voices. I'm gonna say that the card's bad and never banned because it turns off most of the things that you'd want to do in the game. And I can't, unless I'm missing something, think of a type of action that you could take outside of normal summoning and setting traps that you can do with this. And you have to discard those cards. So if you draw into any of your engine pieces or your like really exciting stuff, then it's not going to go off. So, okay, wait, hold on. So in the event that you're in like one of those heavy control type games that's using tons of floodgates, maybe this lets you throw down all your types of like floodgatey type things if that's the only thing in your deck, because that's the only thing that you can rely upon. I still think in that situation it's so niche that but it could be niche and still be really strong in something control in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, and then could be banned simply because it enables like locking your opponent out of the game somehow with extra card draw. But you can't play another one of these. I'm gonna stick to my guns and say it's bad and not banned, but maybe it saw play in that like niche circumstance.
Final answer.
Yeah, final answer.
Oh, you should have went with your gut, because your gut. Well, technically, your gut is wrong because you were talking yourself out of what your intuition was telling you. So I guess you should have gone against your intuition. But I will say though, you got correct. It's not banned. So it is. It's limited. This card has been limited for quite some time now, because when this card was at 3, this was an app. Anytime you saw this card being played against you, you just want to flip the table over because this card is so infuriating. So
what kind of stuff does it do?
Yeah. So you hit the nail right on the head at the end when you were saying how there's 2 different types of decks that Card of Demise fell into. First of all, when people saw this card, they were losing their minds because it says draw 3. Right? Of
course.
And it's cool because it's ported over from the anime. Obviously, they had to put a ton of restrictions on it, but there are a handful of decks that can take advantage of Card of Demise, and we're going to put these into 2 categories. So first are your, let's say, non-degenerate decks. These are decks that can play a very low monster count, that play a lot of trap cards, and you want to get the monsters in the graveyard, or you don't mind getting them in the graveyard because there are ways to like reanimate them and bring them back. So that way,
and I know that. I
Yeah,
knew that, but
so-
I for some reason forgot.
Yeah,
to
so
think about
even
it.
if in the worst case scenario with Card of Demise, you draw 3, and let's say only one of those 3 cards is a trap card or a spell card, right? You would set that face down regardless, just so you don't discard it, and you would discard the 2 monsters. It sort of acts as an engine piece, because now that monster's in the graveyard, you can play like Call the Haunted to resurrect it, and maybe it's a giant thing that you want to get back. For anyone who's, knows, Cosmo, that's what I'm referring to here.
Right.
In a deck like that, it didn't matter that you didn't special summon on your turn, because you were going to special summon on your opponent's turn. And so you made the best of Card of Demise's effect, and it allowed you to essentially just play out your whole hand, slap down Card of Demise, get some more cards. Oh, cool. I got more trap cards. I discard some stuff to the graveyard. Now I can like really just be ahead of my opponent.
Yeah.
The second category.
The one thing, and I do want to hear the one thing. It's like the missing piece was that the graveyard is the second hand in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I knew that, but for some reason I wasn't thinking about the fact that those cards are discarded, and like that means they're in the graveyard, and that means they're usable for stuff. So that makes sense. That all makes sense.
So then the second category are the degenerate decks, and these are the decks like your stun decks, like Barrier Statue Stun, or anything that just is trying to not play the game fair whatsoever, because those decks historically don't special summon at all, so that doesn't matter. The damage is irrelevant because you're not going to be winning by, winning in a turn or anything. You're going to slowly just death by 1,000 cuts attack with like a small guy that's preventing your opponent from playing the game. And most importantly, you want to see either your big pieces that are going to prevent your opponent from playing the game, or enough of them that if your opponent has ways to deal with them, you can sort of refuel and keep them under a lock. So we're talking about like Barrier Statue Stun decks, different things like that. This card, again, was just, it's a very strong card. It's very good.
Yeah.
But it's only used in very particular decks because it does have so many downsides. And the decks that can take advantage of it, though, absolutely love this card to pieces because it's,
I feel like
it's draw 3.
If I hadn't said that part at the end, I would feel much worse about my analysis. but at least I did call that kind of type of degeneracy out in vague terms. Yeah, the graveyard thing, huge oversight on my part. But cool. I mean, I do like that. It sucks that it sucks to play against, and it sucks that the decks that play it are like really unfun to play against. But you do like to see something that's powerful only in like a niche segment of the decks that are in the meta, because then you feel like you have like strong decks with variety. But unfortunately, the variety is like the degeneracy.
And people like drawing cards. I will say for the non-degenerate decks that played Card of Demise, for the most part, like, they did have some annoying elements to them, but at least they were, to a degree, interactive. It just sucked because during this time, Card of Demise was at 3 copies. You would, like, fight through everything, and then it's like, all right, Card of Demise, and they just refuel their hand, and you're just like, all right, I'm out of it now. It felt really... If you were the one playing Card of Demise, you felt great. It was...
So, yeah, because you're able to do combat as long as you do everything in, like, there's a second main phase in Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
Yeah.
So, like, as long as you're doing everything in, like, second main, then you can already have had combat. And so you've already kind of done your damage, and then you... that probably even gives you a little bit more... space to like make decisions, because now you've, like in Magic, it's a rule of thumb to like do most of your action in main phase 2, unless you have to do it in main phase 3. But that's mainly because in a resource game, you want to leave up every possibility for your opponent, so they have to make a difficult decision, not knowing exactly how many options you have, basically. So that's cool.
Yeah, one of the best top decks, though. If you have no cards, man, you see a Card of Demise, you're over the moon. I get to draw 3 cards. Thank you very much.
Ancestral Recall, but free. Cool.
All right, next one.
Okay, this one's famous. Crush card. And this one was this surprise card? Initially?
We'll get into that. that.
Okay, I think I vaguely remember something. Tribute 1 dark monster with 1,000 or less attack. Okay, that's not hard. Because if you tribute like a Sangan, is Sangan dark?
Sangan's dark.
Does that trigger his ability?
It does.
A tribute does? Oh, okay, cool. Then yeah, that's great. Tribute 1 dark monster with 1,000 or less attack. Check all monsters your opponent controls, your opponent's hand, and all cards they draw until the end of your opponent's 3rd turn after this card's... This must be a tracking nightmare. And all cards they draw until the end of your opponent's 3rd turn after this card's activation. and destroy all monsters with 1500 attack. Okay, 1 second. I need to parse this again.
Sure.
Okay. Tribute. Okay, we tributed our, let's just say best case. We tributed our Sangan. We're searching through our deck. We got our guy or whatever. Check all monsters your opponent controls, your opponent has. So yeah, you're destroying everything that's 15 or more in their entire deck. So this is extremely good, and I feel like has to have been banned. Because if you build a deck around... well, actually, does it say destroy all monsters with 1500 more attack? It means in your opponent's deck, right?
Yes.
And not in yours? Okay.
So it's opponent's field. You would look at their hand and destroy anything in their hand just to verify that that's, you know, what they have. And then anything they draw for the next 3 turns.
Absolutely insane. Like, the amount of value this card gives you, like, looking at your opponent's hand is extremely, I feel like, strong in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! It's even strong in a lot of other games, but, or no, is it strong in Yu-Gi-Oh? Because you can just play out all your cards? Yeah, I think so, because then you can play around all their combo pieces and stuff. So, you just eradicate. This feels like a card that was, errated to be a completely different card. And it's just like, give it up, guys. I'll just say it's really, really, really good. And maybe like in its initial release was in like if memory serves, its initial release is in like maybe some sort of prize card or tournament pack or something like that, where it's like really hard to get. And so it doesn't like affect the meta, because not everybody can get access to it. But then it gets a wider printing, and everybody goes, okay, this card's busted. And then it becomes a super degenerate format for like a short period of time, and then it gets Omega banned. And then a few years later, they go, oh, but the flavor, remember from the anime? And then they try to bring it back, and then they say, Crush Card Virus, you gain 1,000 life. And it's like, that's a different card, guys. And they're like, no, remember, it's Crush Card Virus, the card you love. So that's my take. I'm going to say it's extremely good, and it was banned at some point.
He's so good. He's so good. You're almost like dead on in exactly that trajectory of how things played out. Okay, so I'll give you the story for anyone who doesn't know. So you're right. This was a prize card. This was actually the prize card I want to say before Shrink was. So it was the 2005 prize card. If not, it was the one after. It was before. I'm pretty sure it was before though. In any case, Crush Card, like you said, this card is absolutely insane. Sangan was typically the premier target to tribute off for Crush Card. Yeah, so it's funny you said that.
I'm proud of myself.
It's funny you said that. Yeah. Just because Sangan had so many ways to access, but also just because you get value back from it too, right? It's like it's too good not to. But there were some other things that also met the condition. But Sangan was typically what you were going for. Was a prize card. The one thing you were a little bit incorrect about this not warping the meta because it was a prize card. Oh man. So Crush Card was so good. It was so good that when people started winning copies of Crush Card, the people who won copies of Crush Card won more copies of Crush Card because there was like no real way to interact with this card. And it was so devastating because there wasn't really counterplay to this. And especially because there were so few copies in circulation.
7 Tools to the Bandit, was that around?
Hypothetically, but ideally what happens is your opponent would go like set Sangan, set Crush Card. You start your turn. I'm going to Crush Card you on turn 1. You can't even 7 Tools or do anything in response.
Well, that's a skill issue because you
skill issue.
Everyone knows in Yu-Gi-Oh! You got to go first or else you lose.
Yeah, so I remember one time I had a dinner with one of the players from around this time, and he said most people were concerned about getting the cards necessary to build the best deck, and the people who had a reasonable shot of winning were worried about getting Crush Card. So this card was like several $1,000s if you wanted to actually buy it.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was insane. And so... yeah, the best players and teams were throwing around Crush Card viruses just to keep winning tournaments because nothing really could be done about it. It was just that backbreaking and crippling, especially when you pair with how good these individuals were at the time. And then what ended up happening was a few years later, they ended up throwing this card in a reprint set. And that was, of course, the holy grail of that reprint set. But, of course, they short printed it into Oblivion. So it was super hard to get. It was Gold Series 1. It's this version I'm showing you right here.
Printing.
This is
They first printed this in Gold Series 1?
Yep, Gold Series 1. It was incredibly short printed. It was so hard to pull that the copies of this card in this first reprinting of it ever were like $300. because it was that hard to get. And everyone wanted it because it was Crush Card, it was broken, and it was
Yeah.
crazy. And then they banned it not long after that. No surprise. They cashed in on it, and then they're like, yep, okay, this card's insane.
Dude,
and then, like you said, years later, they went on this, like, errata spree for some reason. And they're like, what's another card we can bring back into Yu-Gi-Oh? Crush Card. So they ruined it. It's like, it was basically unplayable, but they brought it back into the game. So it's at 3 copies, but it's errated, so no one plays it because it sucks.
That's so weird. Like, I mean, I guess for flavor they bring it back, but I feel like errata are supposed to say things like, oh, like when I was like, destroy all monsters with 15 or more attack, I think it would be a little bit clearer if it said your opponent's monsters, just so that it wasn't like every 1500 like on the board that you had out or something like that. Like, oh yeah, let's just add this clarifying word. That's the errata, right? Like, oh, this was supposed to have this other different word here. Not like entirely change the card text in a paper format, in a paper game.
Yeah.
Like Hearthstone can rebalance cards because it's
digital.
a digital game.
Yeah.
But like changing a card text so dramatically, someone shows up at their local and is like, well, this is the text on my card. Reading the card explains the card. And it's like, oh, no. You have to have like the app, or you've got to go on the website and have your extra errata text available. I
also feel like it just tarnishes the legacy of this card too, because from the anime, everyone remembers Kaiba using this against everyone. Yeah. And so I feel like just errataing it just really sort of just like desecrates that. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just like a boomer.
The star football player who's like past his prime but like can't give it up, and he comes back for like one last season, and everybody's like, you should have retired ages ago. And like you really tarnished what we missed about it.
Or it's like if they made Dark Magician have like blue eyes stats, right? It's like why just make it, like we've said all throughout this video, just make a new card.
Right. But, they're like, oh yeah, Dark Magician's bad, so we're gonna print it, errata it as an effect monster that says you win the game. Yeah.
All right, 2 left.
That's
two
awesome.
left.
Okay,
what do you think about this one?
Ooh, Dimension Fusion. I've heard these words before. IOC. Okay, that makes sense. Invasion of Chaos. So this is after my time, but it is
still pretty close, relatively.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I remember going to a bookstore and seeing a Chaos Emperor Dragon being played at some local. Like, I wasn't there for the local, but I was there to like buy manga or something like that, and I remember seeing a Chaos Emperor Dragon. Which was an IOC, if memory serves. And Black Luster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, is also in there. Okay. And then Chaos, the guy who's like, he's like at Common or something like that. Chaos guy.
Chaos Sorcerer.
Chaos Sorcerer, there we go. Chaos guy, I think, is the errata. Let's see. Pay 2,000 life points. Both players special. Sorry, that's an absurd effect. Like
your reaction was so priceless.
Yeah.
That was great.
Well, look, we know that like it's like I come from a time where like Solemn Judgment was in play, and like Solemn Judgment's an excellent card. It says, most of the time, you're losing 4,000 life points when you play that. And so you pay 2,000. Both players special summon as many of their removed from play monsters as possible. Isn't there a card called like Return from a Different Dimension?
There is.
That like has a similar effect.
So the difference between this and Return is a trap card. It's only yours, and you have to pay half your life points. In Spirit, they're like, and they were like legal around the same time, right? Yes. Dimension Fusion was printed first. Return came out a bit later. So this was their first swing at this effect. Remove from play is not the graveyard, and so this is all the guys that you've been banishing for your like Chaos Emperor Dragon. Correct. The one I'm showing you is before they changed it to say banished. Yeah. By the way, even the scan, I have I like don't remember seeing this card, but the old printing, even when they like reprint with the modern stuff, because I just got some of that retro pack reprint from Target. It's like they can't replicate it. You know what I mean? It's not the same. It's not the same. Yeah, it's just not the same. I actually have, I think I have a Gemini elf in my desk over there that I just like love looking at it because like the print, I just miss Boomer alert. Boomer alert.
Boomer alert. Get him out of here. Woo, woo. So yeah, this seems incredible. Like if you're playing any deck that isn't banishing a bunch of stuff. So like even in the mirror where you're playing I guess chaos stuff, like the chaos mirror is the situation where like your opponent in my mind gets a lot of value out of this as well. But because you have the initiative and you're on the play when this comes down, and it's Yu-Gi-Oh, so you didn't have to like tap 4 mana to, or 8 mana to play, 6 mana to play this, then you can keep doing stuff.
Everything's free.
Everything's free, and you get to keep playing stuff after you play this. And this feels like a card that should be your whole turn, but no. You've got a bunch of other cards in your hand, and now
Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah, find some way to. Oh, what if you Dimension Fusion and then do Chaos Emperor Dragon and just blast them out with like in the game?
Interesting.
Like, because there's gonna be a bunch of stuff on the board. Anyway, I don't know exactly the combo, but this effect seems so incredibly strong in a set where there's cards at common that have you banishing a light and a dark that I cannot imagine this didn't get abused. The symmetrical effect is interesting, but I feel like if you put this in your deck, you have a plan for that. Especially Chaos Emperor Dragon, because that wipes the whole board anyway. And then also creates more targets for Chaos Emperor Dragon to destroy and then burn your opponent's face. So I'll just say it's really, really good, and it's banned.
Final answer.
At some point. Yeah, final answer.
Yeah, Dimension Fusion's cracked. I'm not even gonna. Gonna try to like cheese you. Anytime they print anything on a card that like says special summon as many of anything as possible, you know there's someone to abuse it.
Yeah, and then they say pay 2,000 life points like that means anything. Like that's almost a joke.
There's also a card called Dark Magician of Chaos that you might remember or you might have seen the image of. That card says when it's special summoned in any way, you get to add any spell card from your graveyard to your hand. And so there's basically ways that you can like do some dumb degenerate loops with this card. Typically, Dimension Fusion was always used for like pseudo FTK/OTK decks that were just trying to like cheese wins out of nowhere. I'm talking about like Reasoning Gate or like any of these other type of decks. If there's Dimension Fusion involved, there was never anything fair happening. Let's
wait a second. Sorry, now that you've mentioned Black Magician of Chaos?
Dark Magician of Chaos, yeah.
Dark Magician of Chaos. I've definitely seen well, maybe in the Japanese it's Black Magician.
That's true.
That's
true.
Yeah, but anyway, they like I was thinking about like looping that when you just like draw that later in the game, but like in the same turn, you just brought back everything that was banished, which is like you banish a bunch of light and a dark. So now you have lights and darks, and I assume that that's the way that it's played. I don't know actually how it's played.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of ways. Like I said, typically what they're trying to do is find ways to banish a bunch of guys and sort of one-sidedly just like Dimension Fusion all their own stuff back and just do a bunch of like degenerate stuff.
I was just imagining like in the same turn, could you Dimension Fusion, then use this materials, the stuff that comes back with Dimension Fusion, to summon Dark Magician of Chaos, and then bring back Dimension Fusion, like all in the same turn, and just like loop like from nothing on the board, basically.
Theoretically, yeah. There's cards such as spell economics that say if there's a spell card that requires you to pay life points, you don't have to pay it. So now Dimension Fusion's free. So you could hypothetically do like, let's say like you banish Dark Magician of Chaos to summon a Chaos guy. Now you could Dimension Fusion, bring Dark Magician of Chaos back. That adds back the Dimension Fusion, and you could basically just do all these like dumb things, like. You know, yeah, it gets really out of hand. This card did not stay legal for... Actually, it stayed legal for kind of a long time, but it got banned pretty quickly, relatively speaking.
I don't know if there was, like, preview season or something back in these days, but I guess because the Japanese cards were...
That was, like, magazines. That was our preview season.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, I feel like you open this at the card shop day one, because I think when Pharaoh Servant came out, I went, like, on release day to the card shop, and everybody was like cracking open packs and seeing cards for the first time. I feel like you see this for the first time and you go, no way, this is wild. I guess you haven't read the other cards that are banishing all kinds of stuff, so maybe you don't know, but still, that's wild.
And you already mentioned it, so I thought it'd be fitting to end with the best card possible.
Yo! Okay, this guy, I do know about this guy.
Okay.
You know, he's famous, and also he's been reprinted a bunch of times, so like in just like collecting cards, I've gotten a few of these. Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End.
Such a good name.
Great name. Effect monster dragon, 3,000, 2,500. That's the blue eye stats, right?
Yep.
And then this card cannot be normal summoned or set. Okay, so it's bad, right? This card can only be special summoned by removing from play 1 light and 1 dark in your graveyard. I forgot it was in your graveyard. That is so absurd. That is so nothing. That is so nothing.
It's free.
That's wild because you already got your value out of the card. So now it's like adding additional card advantage to cards in your graveyard. So that's why it's a second hand. Okay, great. Remove for play 1 light and 1 dark in your graveyard. By paying 1,000 life points, send all cards in both players' hands on the field to the graveyard. Inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent's life points for each card that is sent to the graveyard by this effect. Incredible card. Compliments to the chef. I wasn't even playing Yu-Gi-Oh! When I saw this at the bookstore, and I was like, damn, that thing looks cool. And boy, was it. I'm pretty sure this was a victim of not only being banned, but then being Mickey Mouse unbanned, where it was like errata. It gives you a big hug. It's like
everyone gains 300 life points.
Everyone gains 300 life, and they all have a picnic, and they all give each other high fives and have a grand old time. But yeah, I could imagine. I don't know if this sees. I mean, okay, so I do definitely think it's bad. I do definitely think it's an incredible card. I do wonder. I have no clue about whether or not this sees play in any of the formats, the retro formats. Yeah, because I don't know if they apply that errata or not. Do they?
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Okay, sure. Okay, so anyway, final answer: Omega busted boss monster, probably the gold standard for boss monsters for at least some time. And he's a big boy.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
There's nothing really else to it. This card is responsible for the ban list being created at the end of the day, which I'm not sure if you knew that. This card it's disgusting.
Was there a restricted list before that?
There was. So prior to the ban list existing, cards had been limited. Pot of Greed, Raigeki, all these things had been limited to 1, but they never put themselves in a position where they felt like they had to ban anything.
Right.
And this card, paired with some other cards, were basically the reason why they had to create it. I think the thing, it's such an iconic card, especially for anyone who used to play Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just so cool. Yeah. I think the biggest thing about it is it's just it creates some of the most unfun gameplay imaginable.
Truly.
Which I get it, right? I mean, the fact that no one has any cards anymore, it burns them. Pair it with Yata-Garasu, and now they literally just can't play the game, which was like the whole combo with this card.
The Yata lock. I do know in theory about the Yata lock. I didn't. Yeah. Because I remember when this card came out, because I remember seeing Yata-Garasu and thinking that card looks like it sucks, but I just wasn't playing the game.
Yep, that's what a lot of people thought, and then they were very wrong. They were very wrong.
That's so crazy.
The combo is you have either Sangan or Witch, and then you special summon Chaos Emperor. You nuke the board. The Sangan or Witch triggers. You get to add Yata-Garasu to hand, and then ideally you haven't normal summoned yet, so you summon Yata, and now you attack, and now they can't draw. They have no cards. They just lose the game. Death by 1,000 cuts.
Not that it matters, but the fact that this card sacrifices itself also or destroys itself, right? Because it does, right?
Yep.
That's so funny to me.
Yeah.
That it's just it's like it's there for a moment and then it's gone. We hardly knew ye.
It's also just crazy too because this is in a time where effect priority existed. Where nowadays, if this card was in its original form, because it did get Mickey Mouse, errata, shocker. You could have interacted with it with a trap card. You could have Ring of Destructioned it before it had the chance to activate its effect. But in old Yu-Gi-Oh, you could summon this with priority, declare the effect, and your opponent, the only card that could stop this was Solemn Judgment, and that was it. There was no other way to interact with this card at all, because you were going to get the board wipe no matter what. Effect negation was pretty scarce in old Yu-Gi-Oh! So
that must have felt so good to Solemn Judgment.
Oh, if you're the one doing it, it's the best feeling imaginable. But if you're on the receiving end, you're like, I hate my life. This is horrible.
Yeah, I'm literally imagining, I don't know that this happened, but I'm imagining someone held up their hands like that, and the card flipped up, in the game. I actually saw Solemn Judgment. Oh man, what a powerful feeling.
Yeah, but no, this was a Kaiba card. He played this in one of the later seasons of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think it was one of the ones that technically isn't canon, but who cares? This was what the one duel Kaiba did. This was his ending play to win the duel that he was doing. And so I think he actually used Dimension Fusion and Chaos Emperor Dragon in the same turn.
Oh my god, dude, he was so degenerate.
He's so badass.
That's so crazy. And Yugi was playing, he's the Gamma Warriors. And I'm like, they're not doing anything to this card. Dude.
I will say, when I was making the list for you for this, the Yugi section was a lot harder because he has so many worse cards compared to
Valkyria, Magna Warrior. I was like, okay, cool, man. That's awesome. Anyway, it's destroyed, and I burn you for 1,000.
Yeah, anyway. But that's it. That's all I got for you. How do you feel?
That was so much fun.
Yeah.
I feel good. Definitely had some oversights, but you know, I'm always hard on myself about these things, and I just truly haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh in a while, so you know, it happens.
I'd say your analysis for the most part was pretty good. It's either if it wasn't, you like said it, but then went like with your intuition, thinking like your gut feeling was going a different direction. And I think Yu-Gi-Oh versus other card games sort of like acts in the opposite like line of thinking sometimes, but I think that's just a Yu-Gi-Oh thing.
This is the first time that I've really like looked at Yu-Gi-Oh cards, having played like a lot more TCGs, and especially recently I've been like grinding a bunch of Magic mainly. And so it's interesting to like take all of that context and then go back to a game that I like played when I was younger and go like, oh, these cards are kind of interesting. Like because a lot of the stuff is still at play, like these basic concepts of resources and tempo and card advantage, but they're all weighted very differently in each different game. Yeah. You know? And that's and I think that's very cool. Like a lot of the early Magic cards, like there's a bunch of mathematicians like designing like Ice Age, for example, and there's this card called Necropotence, and like the guy who designed it was basically like, I want to change the equation for these fundamental concepts in the game, because it's a card where it says skip your draw step, and you can I can't even remember how it works. It's like skip your draw step, you can pay 1 life to like put any number of cards to the side, and then at your end step you like get all of those cards. And it was just like, it's like basically like changes the normal like fundamental like equations of the game, and like going to the card ended up being a thing where it was like initially it was like flew under the radar, and then people kind of realized it was busted, and then it kind of got banned. All of these card games have these like core concepts, but then they're like all weighed differently, and you can have an effect in Pokemon like Professor's Research where you discard your hand and draw 7, and that would be really busted in every other card game. But in Pokemon it's fine because there's tons of tutors and like Rota effects and things, and you're just finding lines and sacrificing cards and searching your deck for specific cards to like get your engine going. And then in Yu-Gi-Oh everything's free.
And that's why we love Yu-Gi-Oh.
That's why Yu-Gi-Oh is the best, because it's everything's free except for the cards.
Yeah, that's true. That's
true. Those are expensive.
Unfortunately. But Jarvis, thank you so much.
Konami, please reprint. You know, like.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad you had a lot of fun. This was awesome. Glad we got to do this.
Yeah, this was so much fun. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And maybe for those of you at home, you know, hopefully you learned something about, you know, some of your favorite Yu-Gi-Oh cards if you are a Kaiba lover, like I am, and apparently the Jarvis is as well. And yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll have you back on for round 2. We'll see.
Hey, I'd love to. But yeah, thanks for having me, and hope everyone enjoyed.
So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shout outs to Shadow1317, Sim00x3, MBT Play Medolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, Dan the Man Hoban, Little Fadeleaf, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Flannel Daddy, Twinkle Muncher, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, Wonder Waffle, MBT canceled by community soon, canceled by all committee soon, canceled by all players soon, Corvain, Absolute Angriest Peacock of the Edison Club, Daniel Howell, and life keeps using solemn judgment on my hopes and dreams. Thank you all so much again for watching, and we will see you next time.